March 2nd, 2012. A fateful day that lives at the forefront of my memories. I left for elementary school that morning, returned home, and left for Athens, Georgia, about 20 minutes away to stay with my grandparents for the weekend. As I sat in my mom's Honda Oddessey on the intersection of Alps Street and West Broad Street, something that had been irking me all day came to a head. The weather. The clouds were ominously dark, juxtaposed to the setting sun, and the temperatures soared unusually high for early March. Throughout the day, the wind continued to pick up and instigated a feeling that I've only felt one other time in my life up to that point. Much like the evening of April 27th, 2011, the energy in the air was evident enough to a degree that even I as a child could tell that there was something wrong. That evening, after arriving at my grandparents' house, I went down to the basement and clicked on the old CRT-TV, tuning in to Channel 2 just in time to witness coverage for the Buchanan, Georgia EF4 Tornado, with the meteorologists speaking of a wider outbreak of tornadoes in portions of Indiana and Kentucky. So what happened? A historic early-season tornado outbreak sporting 70 tornadoes throughout the southern states and along the Ohio River Valley. Most infamously, the Henryville, Indiana EF4. Today, we will be taking a deep dive into the March 2nd through the 3rd, 2012 tornado outbreak, discussing the meteorological synopsis, the events as they happened, along with the aftermath and long-term recovery of the areas impacted. Welcome to Nature's Fury. Before going headfirst into the March 2nd outbreak, we need to discuss an important event that impacted roughly the same area just 2 days prior. From February 28th through the 29th, 42 tornadoes touched down across the Great Plains and Ohio River Valley, an event known as the 2012 Leap Day tornado outbreak. Of those, the strongest was a violent EF4 tornado with winds of 180 miles per hour that hit the city of Harrisburg, Illinois. The damage caused by the severe storms caused both meteorologists and residents to be on edge. Meteorologists at NWS Louisville, such as John Gordon, said their hands were already full due to the events of the 29th. At the same time, they were preparing for the events of March 2nd. Mike Callahan, a former service hydrologist at the office, said that even a few days ahead, all the parameters were there. To put it simply, meteorologists knew that the events of the 29th were merely a warm-up for what would become a historic outbreak just 2 days later. Given what the synoptics were looking like, the concern was warranted. In the upper levels of the atmosphere, a large trough was slowly moving across the United States. Embedded within were multiple short waves. An extremely strong jet streak was present along the boundary of the trough. Closer to the surface, a developing surface cyclone was expected to rapidly deepen and move northeast. The warm front was expected to move northward and expand the open warm sector, bringing in moderate instability to the Ohio River Valley. Coinciding with the surface cyclone's development was a strong low-level jet. The expectation for the event was for elevated storms early on north of the warm front, posing a significant hail threat for Indiana and Illinois. The real event was going to begin later on in the day. As the warm front lifted north, storms were expected to fire within the weakly capped warm sector and along the cold front. Those storms would track across the river valley, producing large hail, strong winds, and potentially strong, long-track tornadoes. Areas further south in the southeastern United States were also under the radar for severe weather. Now let's talk numbers. First, wind shear. Wind shear was absurdly high, with strong upper to mid-level flow of 100 to 110 knots along the boundary of the trough, and 70 to 80 knots of flow across the main risk area, with weaker but still significant flow in the southeast. The low-level jet was strong at around 50 to 60 knots, weaker further south but still decent. Effective bulk shear in the Ohio River Valley ranged from 60 to 80 knots, and effective storm relative helicity was high, ranging from 300 to 600 meters squared per second squared. The high bulk shear and a high storm relative helicity was also present in the southeast. What about instability? Unseasonably high. Mixed layer CAPE was around 1,000 to 2,000 joules per kilogram, with weaker instability in the south. Large looped photographs indicated the high likelihood of supercell thunderstorms. Temperatures peaked during the afternoon within the warm sector, ranging from the upper 50s into the low 70s. Some areas in southern Kentucky had record highs in the low 80s. Dew points ranged from the upper 50s into the 60s. Given the conditions in play, the Storm Prediction Center began issuing outlooks on the event. On February 29th, a Day 3 slight risk was issued, with a 30% risk extending from northeast Mississippi towards southern Ohio. A Day 2 moderate risk was issued for most of the same region. The moderate remained for the first Day 1 outlook, but then at 13Z, a high risk was introduced, which was expanded in the 1630Z and 20Z outlook, for portions of the Ohio River Valley, for a 30% SIG-TOR risk. A 15% SIG-TOR extended from portions of central Ohio and Indiana southward into central Alabama. Also in place was a 45% SIG-wind risk and a 45% significant hail risk that were in place for many of the same areas. But with the synopsis covered, the events began to unfold. The event itself began pretty early in the morning, with multiple areas of scattered severe storms popping up through Kentucky, Tennessee, and portions of Missouri. A severe thunderstorm watch was issued for portions of Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana for the threat of large hail. As the sun rose, satellite imagery showed an area of clearing within the warm sector. And just so everybody knows, everything is going to be in Eastern Standard Time to avoid confusion. Near 10 a.m., storms began firing near the cold front and within the open warm sector, mainly in Missouri and Illinois. The storms entering a favorable environment for supercells to develop and thrive. In terms of the tornado threat, there was already an area to watch: northern Alabama, northwestern Georgia, and eastern Tennessee. At 10:10 a.m., the first major tornado of the event touched down in northern Alabama, a low-end EF3 tornado that tore through Madison and Limestone counties. At 10:30 a.m., the areas mentioned were placed under a tornado watch. Back in Missouri, at 10:55 a.m., a PDS tornado watch was issued for portions of Missouri, Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois. Storm development would continue over the next few hours as the warm front continued moving northward, expanding the open warm sector. Just after 12:30 p.m., all eyes were on Tennessee, as just outside of Chattanooga, trouble was brewing. At approximately 12:41 p.m., a tornado touched down just to the northwest of Harrison, Tennessee. Initially, the tornado caused some light structural damage and downed a few trees. The tornado moved east-northeast and crossed Buchanan Bay, strengthening as it went inland, crossing through multiple neighborhoods, where many residences suffered EF2 to EF3 damage, and one residence was wiped out. The tornado weakened and went across Savannah Creek, emerging as an EF1 by the time it crossed into Bradley County. The twister strengthened a bit as it continued into the northern parts of the city of Cleveland, weakening as it moved into Polk County, producing EF0 to EF1 damage before traveling into McMinn County, heavily damaging several rural homes, then lifting on the north end of Star Mountain at 1:35 p.m. The Chattanooga-Harrison, Tennessee EF3 tornado was on the ground for 54 minutes, traveled a total of 41 miles with a maximum path width of 400 yards, and peak winds of 165 miles per hour. The twister caused a little over $35 million in damages and injured 44. Meanwhile, back in the Ohio River Valley, at 1:05 p.m., another PDS tornado watch was issued for eastern Indiana, southwestern Ohio, and central Kentucky. Around 1:30, a group of small storms formed ahead of a well-defined supercell thunderstorm in Indiana. The southern two storms of that three-storm group underwent a merger, and the cell quickly matured, and just before 3, the supercell would produce the most infamous tornado of the day. The show was about to begin, and it would be unforgettable for many across Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky for the worst reasons possible. At 2:50 p.m., a tornado touched down on the southern side of Fredericksburg, Indiana. The twister initially produced EF1 damage, moving across farmland before toppling a high-tension metal power structure and snapping and uprooting trees. As it traveled over a ridge, it intensified, fast, reaching EF3 strength as it hit State Route 135 at Dutch Creek Road, where large chunks of 5 to 6 inch thick asphalt were blown 10 to 30 yards away in the grass nearby. It continued northeast of Route 135, with the path width ranging from a quarter to a third of a mile wide. The damage was mostly relegated to trees. Then the tornado crossed US 60, south of New Pekin, strengthening to EF4 intensity as it destroyed a large factory building down to its slab. The debris from that building was observed 1/2 to 3/4 of a mile downwind. Multiple other buildings in the location were severely damaged. At roughly the same time at NWS Louisville, they were extremely concerned about what was going on in New Pekin. But surprisingly, there were very few calls coming into the office. The office gets a call. It's Rosie, Mike's wife. She tells the office that she could see the tornado, and that there are little tornadoes inside of a big one. They were dealing with a multi-vortex tornado. Mike tells Mark Jarvis, the lead forecaster, what Rosie told him. Mark says, "We're dealing with a multi-vortex tornado. I'm issuing a tornado emergency for Henryville." The tornado entered extreme southeast Washington County and then crossed into northwest Clark County. Locals stated that the tornado looked like a black wall as it approached. The twister fluctuated in intensity for a short while before it crossed I-65, entering the Henryville city limits, damaging several vehicles and semis, closing the interstate for several hours, and severely damaging multiple businesses. Homes on the north side of State Highway 160 were hit, with evidence that the tornado was multi-vortex and had estimated winds of 175 miles per hour. A little bit before the tornado arrived in town, Angel Perry, a school bus driver, was working on bringing kids home before the storm struck. The school had dismissed early because of the threat of severe weather. While driving, she saw the tornado right in front of her. She was at a mental crossroads. Does she finish her route and risk the children and herself being hit while inside the bus, or find somewhere safe for the students and herself to take cover? She decided to rush back to Henryville Elementary School, part of the Henryville Junior-Senior High School complex. She instructed the children what to do, and at 3:12 p.m. they arrived at the school and took shelter in the elementary school. 3 minutes later, the twister struck the southern buildings of the school complex, with estimated winds of 170 miles per hour. The middle school suffered the worst of the tornado. Extensive damage continued as it moved through the east side of Henryville, destroying homes and businesses and taking down a high-tension tower. It then moved towards Marysville, rapidly narrowing to a rope-like structure and ended as an EF1. But simultaneously, a new cyclic tornado vortex rapidly formed from the same supercell, and became the new primary tornado. I know that sounds weird, but that's how it's described in the report. The new vortex rapidly intensified to EF3 strength as it crossed the southern portions of Marysville, damaging several homes. Another cyclic vortex formed east of Marysville, intensifying and merging with the primary circulation as it continued to move through Clark County. The tornado traveled into Scott County and Jefferson County, producing EF4 damage in both. It extensively damaged forests in southern Jefferson County before crossing the Ohio River into Trimble County, Kentucky. A second vortex formed adjacent to the first and destroyed a barn on Rogers Road. It continued moving eastward, weakening and narrowing in size before lifting at 3:39 p.m. The New Pekin, Henryville, Indiana EF4 tornado was on the ground for 49 minutes, traveled 49 miles with a peak width of 700 yards, and estimated peak winds of 175 miles per hour. The twister killed 11, injured many, and cost a little over $58 million in damages. At 4:23 p.m., the same supercell produced yet another twister in Grant County in northern Crittenden. Almost immediately, it began producing low to mid-range EF3 damage, specifically in the Harvester subdivision at the west end of Barley Circle. It crossed into Kenton County at 4:24 p.m., strengthening to EF4 intensity as it crossed I-75, destroying homes down to their foundations. The EF4 damage continued to the north of Lexington Pike, across Route 45, and ended near the Bagby Road area. The tornado produced high-end EF3 damage as it continued to the east-northeast, destroying numerous double and single-wide homes. It continued into southeast Kenton County, producing EF1 to EF2 damage in the Morning View area before lifting near the Campbell County line at 4:32 p.m. The Crittenden EF4 tornado was on the ground for 9 minutes, traveled 9.85 miles with a peak width of 880 yards, and estimated peak winds of 175 miles per hour. The twister killed 4, injured 8, and caused roughly $20 million in damages. 7 minutes later, the supercell produced another tornado, touching down in central Campbell County at 4:39 p.m. northwest of Peach Grove. It began producing high-end EF3 damage as it neared the Pendleton County line, crossing into the county at 4:41 p.m. Widespread damage continued as it moved across Mays Road, then crossing AA Highway over the Ohio River into Clermont County, Ohio at 4:46 p.m., hitting the town of Moscow, ripping roofs and exterior walls off of structures, with a few homes being destroyed outright. The tornado continued across mostly rural areas as it moved into Brown County, then lifting south of Hammersville at 5:02 p.m. The Moscow EF3 tornado was on the ground for 23 minutes, traveled 20.4 miles with a peak width of 440 yards, and estimated peak winds of 160 miles per hour. The twister killed 3, injured 13, and caused roughly $9 million in damages. While the Henryville EF4 was ongoing, a group of discrete cells began to pop up in central Kentucky ahead of the line of storms along the cold front. Initially, the cells were mainly producing large hail, but as the discrete storms continued moving eastward into NWS Jackson, Kentucky's area of responsibility, 2 cells in particular began taking advantage of the environment in place and began producing tornadoes. At 5:39 p.m., a supercell thunderstorm dropped a tornado in Menifee County on Tar Ridge, 2 miles southwest of Mariba. It tracked east-northeast, crossing Highway 77, strengthening to EF3 intensity, producing extensive damage to several homes. It crossed Highway 460 and into Morgan County at around 5:46 p.m., expanding in size to become nearly a mile wide as it crossed the county line, and struck West Liberty, Kentucky at approximately 5:58 p.m. The twister extensively damaged nearly every structure in the town. It continued moving through the remainder of Morgan County, causing further damage to structures and downing thousands of trees. It traveled across both Lawrence and Johnson counties, moved near the left fork of Little Blaine Creek, then across Lavisa Fork before crossing into Wayne County, West Virginia, just north of Clifford at 6:38 p.m. The tornado passed between Dunlow and Radnor, then into the Cove Gap vicinity along Route 37, destroying homes. The tornado crossed into Lincoln County at 6:57 p.m., weakened steadily, and lifted at 7:07 p.m. The West Liberty EF3 was on the ground for 88 minutes, traveled 86 miles with a peak width of a mile, and estimated peak winds of 140 miles per hour. The twister killed 10, injured 112, and caused nearly $6 million in damages. At 6:50 p.m., a separate supercell produced a tornado in Wolfe County, producing tree damage as it moved into McGuffin County and proceeded to rapidly intensify. At 7:03 p.m., it struck Saylorsville at EF3 strength, with a path width up to 3/4 of a mile wide, destroying many businesses and structures across town, with the worst impacts being the intersection of Mountain Parkway and US Route 460. The twister trekked onward, crossing into Johnson County at EF3 strength at 7:08 p.m., hitting the towns of Hager Hill and West Venlier, destroying several structures in both municipalities, blowing roofs off of buildings, and downing trees. It crossed into Martin County at 7:25 p.m., weakening to EF2 strength as it damaged structures and downed several huge trees in the town of Davila. The twister hit a home in Debord at 7:32 p.m. and caused significant damage near the communities of Beauty and Lovely at around 7:38 p.m., before crossing into West Virginia and lifting at 7:42 p.m., but in the process, destroyed a railroad communication tower. The Saylorsville, Kentucky EF3 tornado was on the ground for 52 minutes, traveled 49.2 miles with a peak width of 3/4 of a mile, and estimated peak winds of 160 miles per hour. The twister killed 2, injured 37, and caused roughly $37 million in damages. The threat in Kentucky finally started to die off as storms began leaving the warm sector, and the storms along the cold front were part of a line. The main threat for severe weather was now shifting southward, with the most significant tornado happening in western Georgia. At 8:09 p.m., a tornado touched down in Haralson County, initially producing EF1 damage, snapping and uprooting trees. Moving along Bethlehem Church Road, the tornado strengthened to EF3 intensity, collapsing a house and destroying a repair shop. Moving eastward, damage across the rest of Haralson County was relegated to mostly trees before it moved into Paulding County near Yorkville at around 8:28 p.m., hitting a residential neighborhood, the Paulding County Regional Airport, then Poole Elementary School. The twister moved through downtown Dallas, Georgia, damaging homes and businesses before lifting near McClure Trail and McClure Drive at around 8:50 p.m. The Buchanan EF3 tornado was on the ground for 41 minutes, traveled 29.02 miles with a peak width of 200 yards, and estimated peak winds of 165 miles per hour. It injured one and caused a little under $12 million in damages. There were other major tornadoes that did occur on the 2nd and into the 3rd, including a fatal EF3 tornado that hit Holton, Indiana, and multiple EF2 tornadoes in various states, including 2 large ones in Alabama during the night. The supercell behind the Henryville cell produced an EF1 tornado that struck portions of Henryville, including areas that were hit by the first tornado. The outbreak continued into the 3rd, with a slight risk in place from coastal Louisiana through the southern coast of North Carolina. A 10% tornado risk was in place, and the threat was expected to die down going into the evening. The last tornado of the outbreak touched down at 12:56 p.m., an EF3 tornado that tore through Lowndes and Lanier County, Georgia, which lifted at 1:10 p.m. Outside of the tornado threat, there was the threat of high winds and large hail. On the 2nd, there were 325 wind reports and 469 hail reports made to the Storm Prediction Center, with the largest hail size reported being 4.25 inches in diameter, and the strongest non-tornadic wind gusts being 83 miles per hour. After the event, going into Sunday, many areas hit by the tornado outbreak, such as Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, and West Virginia, were hit with snow. Across the states hit, many came out after the tornadoes moved through to see the destruction the twisters had caused. The carnage began quite early in the morning in Limestone and Madison counties in Alabama. Multiple homes were devastated, either completely destroyed, or in the case of one home off Mooresville Road, left half standing. On one street in Alabama, there were 2 homes. One was destroyed in 2011, presumably during the super outbreak, and the other one hit by a tornado on March 2nd, according to ABC News. Several homes outside of Chattanooga were destroyed, lifted off their foundations, or left as just piles of rubble. The Island Cove Marina was smashed by the tornado, with $6 million in damages being attributed to the marina. Up in Indiana, the extensive damage caused by the Henryville EF4 was noticeably early in the tornado's track. On Route 135, large chunks of the asphalt road were ripped off, left as small bits and pieces. A large factory building near New Pekin was destroyed, and other homes and businesses were left in ruin. Near the Washington-Clark County line, a brick house was completely destroyed with no outside walls standing. Then there was Henryville, near total and utter destruction. Homes were wiped off their foundations with whatever was left there in a pile of debris, and businesses were completely wiped out. A school bus on North Ferguson Street left under power lines and impaled into a restaurant next to the middle high school complex. Multiple school buses that were parked at the school littered the streets, including 2 school buses that were ripped off their chassis. The school complex was heavily damaged. The middle school cafeteria was left ruined and destroyed. In Marysville, the town was completely leveled. Almost all homes in the small community were either severely damaged or destroyed outright. Several brick homes in Jefferson County were leveled as well. Across Holton, Indiana, residences were destroyed, and for some along West Versailles Street, only scattered pieces of people's homes remained. East of Holton, silos were bent or twisted and destroyed at local farms. Along Old Lexington Road near Crittenden, a residential building was torn from its foundation. A residence off Bagby Road was destroyed as well. The destruction with the tornado continued, with multiple structures left ruined or wiped out entirely along Carlisle Road. The Moscow tornado began its path of destruction with extensive tree damage, before leveling homes along County Road 1029, Schmidt Lane, and Short Iver Road. Crossing the Ohio River, Numerous homes were obliterated in Moscow. The West Liberty tornado leveled multiple homes on Opossum Hollow Road, including a brick home that collapsed into the basement. In West Liberty, nearly every house and business in town was damaged in one way or another, including the police department, with a pile of debris blocking the entrance. A similar story happened in Saylorsville, where damage was abundant. In Dallas, Georgia, a hangar was destroyed at Paulding County Regional Airport, and 19 of the 23 planes were totaled. Poole Elementary had a partial roof failure, with part of the roof found across the campus. 6 modular classrooms were destroyed as well. In total, 70 tornadoes touched down across multiple states, including 2 EF4 and 9 EF3 tornadoes. A total of 41 people were killed, and the outbreak caused over $1.5 billion in damages. But the emotional turmoil went further than those impacted. It went to the meteorologists working that day too. Meteorologists' guilt after a natural disaster when fatalities have occurred is nothing new. But reading more into this outbreak, it was everywhere. According to Mark Weinberg, WDRB-TV chief meteorologist, when the news team got footage of the tornado on the ground and reports of fatalities, all he could feel was the feeling of helplessness, knowing that they couldn't save everyone. But even with the devastation around them, local communities came together to begin the process of recovering. And even with all the fatalities, miracles occurred that Friday in March. On March 2nd, the governors of Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio issued a state of emergency, with a major disaster declaration being ordered by President Barack Obama for Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia. After the tornadoes hit, search and rescue operations started fast, according to Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels. "Our people are racing the nightfall," he said. Cleanup crews came in and began working in the following days across the multiple towns impacted by the severe weather. In Henryville, residents turned to faith. The following Sunday, about 100 residents came to St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church for Mass. Volunteers at the church were giving victims donated clothing, and they had to move all the bags so people could sit in the pews. Margaret Short said to the New York Times, "The nice things about a small community is your church is your family." Just outside the church, volunteers set up grills to make an eggs and bacon breakfast for emergency workers. Others came in from around Henryville, hammering tarps on the roofs of buildings, pulling beams from wrecked houses, and helping people look for their valuables. Over 12,000 people from all 50 states and 7 countries came to help southern Indiana, and over $3 million were donated to help rebuild. The National Guard was active across multiple states. In Sawyerville, Kentucky National Guard members helped free 2 employees trapped in an auto parts store. The Christian Appalachian Project went to Martin, Johnson, and McGuffin counties, with disaster relief community volunteers to help work on 140 homes and properties, spending 19,377 hours cleaning debris, accepting donations, and assisting at disaster shelters. In Georgia, 11 Alive News collaborated with the school box and the local community of Dallas to donate supplies to Poole Elementary. Information at a large scale on some of the individual communities that were hit is minimal, but some miracles came out of the outbreak. In Cove Gap, West Virginia, in a sixth sense of irony, a funeral was being held in the community of Wayne for a Cove Gap resident, where several neighbors attended. Those residents were away from home when the tornado struck. That funeral likely saved lives. In Henryville, Stephanie Decker, a mother of 2, protected her children from the tornado, comforting them as the twister ripped their house apart. Stephanie was unfortunately crushed by the debris and lost both her legs in the process. Her story caught the attention of the nation, and she met with President Obama later that year in June. At news stations and NWS offices, letters came in from residents who thanked them for their service, thanking meteorologists for keeping them safe. It's been 12 years since then, so what has happened since? 12 years after the twisters, progress has been made in a lot of communities. In Henryville, within 5 months of the tornado striking the town, the elementary school and middle and high school complex was rebuilt and opened for the next school year. Looking through Google Maps, which dates to May 2023, the town has been rebuilt, with the only visible signs of damage being the lack of trees. Moscow, Ohio has been through a lot. In 2022, the Zimmer power plant, responsible for 90% of the small town's tax revenue, shut down. But the town was persistent, voting against a resolution to dissolve the village to become part of Washington Township in 2023. Looking at aerial imagery, there are houses present where the tornado crossed the Ohio River. Saylorsville, Kentucky has also worked hard to rebuild, bringing back most of the restaurants on Restaurant Row, repairing and rebuilding homes, and installing a new tornado siren. Residents in West Liberty built back, with residents working quickly to try and bring back some form of normalcy. Donald McKenzie reopened his restaurant early in the recovery process, initially working out of a trailer. Thanks to the community's aid, McKenzie's pool and lunchroom was fully remodeled 10 months after the tornado struck. The commercial bank, which was hit hard by the twister, was rebuilt in June 2016. Not all places had the same fate, such as Marysville, Indiana. Steve Boley, a resident, stated that a lot of the residents who once lived there had moved. Stephanie Decker founded the Stephanie Decker Foundation, a charity aimed at helping children with prosthetics. Despite all the good deeds that came following and all the rebuilding that took place, the mental scars remain. One of those scarred was Jackson Bagshaw, who was one of those who took shelter in the elementary school. He told WHAS 11 that he suffered from severe storm anxiety, but he learned to cope with it. Those across Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia remember vividly what happened that fateful Friday. Everything from the tornadoes, the devastation left behind, and the efforts taken to come back stronger. It wasn't an easy journey, but they kept moving forward. Those across the South and the Ohio River Valley will never forget the tornado outbreak that transpired on March 2nd, 2012, and it's one that I will not forget anytime soon. Special thanks to my proofreaders, those being Gamma Ray, Griff, Ian Height, and Thomas Schwent, Celtic White for the character stills I use, Zinno, Cyanide Blue, and Crackalick for letting me use their music whenever I use it, and all of you for watching, it means a lot. Special thanks to those subscribed to the channel Patreon or are a YouTube member. Those being Ace Cooper, Acrid Wolf, I hope I pronounced that right, Montpelier and the Car Wash channel of Northern Pennsylvania and Ohio at the Alfie's Army tier, Charlie Lichterman, Heldrick Zero, It's Branded Shoe Music Gaming Memes, Michelle M, and Tanner at the Alf Jr. tier, and All the Blue Lights, Brian Hawley, Dante DMC, Foscrew, Griff, Hannah Stormer, Jacario, Joey Murphy, Cara Kelly, Katie Scambalone, Colby, Liz Swaff, Miguel Medeiros, Nito-kun, Nyan Binary, Rama, Sakura Cyclone Haven, Sherry Number 33, Sorestro is Bad at Gaming, Tefu, Van Granny, and Worm Off the String at the Alf Mini tier, and everyone listed on screen at the Alf Supporter tier. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you want to have access to full uncut interviews alongside my scripts and other things in the future, consider subscribing to the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member at the Alf Mini tier. It helps me financially and will allow me to do things in the future that would not otherwise be possible. Anyways, that covers everything. If you enjoy what I do, consider liking, subscribing to the channel, commenting your thoughts, and sharing it around. I'm Alferia, you all stay safe out there, and I'll see you all soon.